Hello. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to join us today. Really appreciate you making it over here to Mandalay Bay and up those 3 levels. Took me a little while to find this place. So today we're going to be here to talk about, about integration. And so my name is Justin. I am a director at AWS. My organizations are responsible for building a couple of services, EventBridge and step functions that are used a lot in the integration space. So really excited to be here, but I also spend a lot of time talking with customers about the needs that are driving integration and how broadly they're doing that across their enterprise and across AWS services. Tom?
My name is Tom Soderstrom, and at one point I was a useful developer. Now I'm an enterprise strategist, which means that I talk to executives across the world. And I wanted to share from when I get up, from the executive level, what are they looking for? And then we'll talk some more about that. I was NASA's first CTO. I was Chief Technology Innovation Officer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and was on the AWS Customer Advisory Board for 13 years. First enterprise to use the cloud, and bled a lot on the bleeding edge, but here to share those lessons. So really happy that you're here, and we're going to go from strategic to technical.
All right, and I'm Brian Zambrano. I am a service specialist solutions architect. Before this, I was an application developer, so a long career of building products, mostly in the startup world. And I've been focusing on event-driven architectures and integrations for about 2.5 years now as a specialist at AWS. And so one thing in this role that's been really, really neat is to see the things that are working with customers and the challenges that customers face. And so a lot of those learnings are going to be in this presentation. So, and also to all of you, congratulations on getting to Thursday. So I hope your feet are still holding on, hanging onto your legs.
Exactly. And do you still have a voice?
Okay, so thanks. So one thing before we get started is this is a 200 level session. And so what that means, we aren't going to get into the nitty gritty technical details of any given service. We love to do that, but there are a lot of other sessions that will allow you to do that. What we're trying to do here is really step back and provide some context around thinking about integration, how that fits with your company, how you can think about it more broadly. And so I just wanted to give that warning. We'll have some technical aspects to it, but we're really trying to look big. And we'll send some, at the end, give you a guide and some resources you can dive deeper later. Okay, so what are some of the things we want you to take away from this session? We want you to understand why integration matters, why an integration strategy matters, and how to think about integration strategy, how to think about that on AWS, and also how you can learn more in the coming days. We're going to start. Tom is going to set some context around the challenges that organizations are facing today. I'll talk about integration strategies. Brian will dive into some examples to help bring this to life, and then we'll talk about how to learn more. Tom?
Thank you, Justin. Just to make sure we talk about things that are relevant, how many in here are developers? Raise your hands proudly. Wow, okay. I have to take mine down. I used to be. How many people work in an enterprise of over 1,000 people? Okay, this will be relevant. How many people can integrate all your applications already? Okay, good. That's where you come in, brother. So what we found, now I'm going to share the story about NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there were some good news and some bad news. But really, if you look at this stat, isn't that amazing? How do you integrate that? So we're going to have some strategies. They're disconnected. I mean, you may have, do you all see this problem? Maybe not 1,000, but would you resonate with this problem in your applications, being developers? No, I guess we're done. So let me tell my story. Anybody been to Jet Propulsion Laboratory? All right, thank you, sir. Everybody else, talk to him about his experience. It's a fun place to visit. It really is a nerd geek shop for people interested in space. It's really fun. I came on as the first NASA Chief Technology Officer. I grew up at JPL as a programmer, and then I moved out in the world and did other things as developer and manager. And then I came back as NASA's first CTO. And I thought, by the way, who in here is in IT? Raise your hands. It's about half of you. Okay, so most of you are developers, half of you are in IT. The interesting thing is I came back as the first CTO for IT. I grew up in the mission side, so I knew the business and the mission, and had 10 years of other industry experience. So obviously they would love me, right? No, because I was now in IT. And still, in what we see as we talk to executives across the world, IT wants to do it once and do it right. The businesses wants to move fast. And I'm going to share what the priorities are and tell the story here in a second. But cloud computing became a key for us. And I was the first enterprise to use cloud computing, certainly the first government entity. So we came up with a lot of things. And how many people are here are not from AWS? Okay, you have a fantastically strong voice. The secret and why we could come up with all these services, hopefully you recognize some of them, Cloud, Glacier, et cetera, was because it was things that AWS was interested in at the time. And we would then offer to talk about it. And so your secret to success here, to influence how we build things, is to see what were the announcements, and then if that's something that can help you, dive deep. Work with your account managers, your solutions architects, and tell us what you need. It works wonderfully. So all of these services AWS built, and I as a customer paid nothing. I just talked about it and used it, and as a result, we were the first ones to use cloud computing at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but also brought it into the federal government, NASA, and all the intelligence agencies and defense. So being first helps. So did you realize there's something called a disruption index? And it's happening 50 times faster than just a few years ago. Now, you're developers, so you're going to be part and parcel of making this work. And what is the chief executive's priority? So I talked to 100 executives and their teams this past year, my group of enterprise strategists. We talked about 2,000. This rises as the #1 priority, speed. Speed, skills, compliance, and cybersecurity, of course. But speed is scary. Our organizations are not just a straightforward Autobahn where you flow your Ferrari. So what do? You slow down? Not if you're an executive. That's not the answer. The answer is to move fast. But how do you do that? You put in guardrails. Guardrails is something that protects you, something that you cannot make a big mistake from. And that's kind of the lesson learned here. What guardrails can you put in? So what we're seeing is we came up with company structures in the industrial revolutions, and they're still the same. Lots of bureaucracy. How do you innovate through that? It's really quite simple. Break the problem down to small, that risk is as small as possible. And how do you do that when you have 1,000 applications that you're trying to integrate? That's a real problem. So you can go into the cloud, which we did, and it's wonderful. But what's the rest of it? It's all the applications, the files, the data that gets to integrated. Are you familiar with the one- and two-way doors? Raise your hand if you're familiar with that concept. A few of you, so I'll tell it. The one-way door is a super important decision that only the CEO can make. For AWS, it's building a new region, money, multiple billions of dollars. A two-way door, on the other hand, is something that you can walk through and you can come back. So it's a small decision. And one of the benefits that we saw of cloud computing is everything is a two-way door. Try it, didn't work, that's okay, we'll try something else. So this culture of experimentation is really key. And we're seeing that at the executive level be interesting. And who does that really help? Developers, you. Because you're going to be the ones who's going to try new things. So not being afraid to try new things is one. And again, all the legacy is going to hold us back. So how do we get around it? We want to create this new world where the risk is minimized. Everything becomes a two-way door. And once you decide what works, you can then double down. Have you heard the story of think big, start small, scale fast? It works. So think really big with your executives, then start small with these experiments, and it may be that you can integrate applications to move much faster. And then the things that pay dividends, then scale fast. If you build it cloud natively, of course, you'll scale up and down. You know that, executives don't necessarily know that. It's too abstract, so that's your opportunity. Now, you're all developers, so I want to see if this resonates. We've seen developers out there who gets to program 5 hours a week because they do all these other things. Favorite thing, of course, is meetings, but also waiting for code, waiting for security compliance. My favorite thing from reInvent this year is Amazon Q Developer because it can build in those things. Security and compliance is not added on where you wait for it, it's built in. So hopefully you're all trying that. So if you do that, what you'll be able to do is spend a lot more time developing and integrating these applications so you're getting rid of legacy that's holding you back. Is anybody here in a startup? Nobody? Okay, I did a lot of startups. But how do you prevent from creating tomorrow's legacy today? So thinking this integration strategy up front is really key. So what on earth is an integration strategy? That's a hard one. It's too tough for me.
Thanks, Tom. So I hope the context Tom provided helps you understand how your organization is thinking about this, but also how your executives are thinking about this. A lot of you are developers, and in this, what we want to try to do is help you understand that context so that you can tie through the initiatives you're driving to the needs of your organization as seen by your executive. And so executives like to talk a lot about strategy. But what is strategy? Strategy, I think, is probably one of the most commonly but inconsistently used words in business. Now, if you ask 10 people, you'll probably get 11 answers as to what strategy is. But one thing we can probably all agree on is that strategy is important. I really like this quote here from Sun Tzu, one of history's greatest strategists, who, as he says, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And what this means is that without this strategy, you will not be successful. And having that strategy is so critical. You can focus on the tactics, but strategy is super important. So still, what does it mean? This is a definition that I like to use. So strategy, it's high level, and it's a framework that aligns decisions toward a long-term outcome. So these three phrases in here are super important. Strategy is long-term. Strategy drives outcomes over years. It's not something that operates over a small period of time. Tactics operate over a short period of time, typically. Strategy is over the long term. Strategy is also high level. And it's high level because it deals with large-scale issues, large-scale concerns, and not necessarily the fine grain. And it also is used to align decisions. So by having the long term in mind, by having a big view, a big broad view, it can allow individuals, teams, and parts of the organization to align their decisions over time to accomplish that outcome. So this is how I think about strategy. Now, what about integration? So integration is also another word that we use very freely, but maybe don't always have the same understanding. So if I can get the clicker to work, okay. So here is one definition: to form, coordinate, or blend into a functioning or unified whole. So integration is really about composing components that do something on their own in order together to do something different and typically more important. Now, when we think about integration in our jobs, we often think of it as a painful thing we have to do. We have to integrate the ERP. We have to integrate another company. We have to integrate this. And this is oftentimes how this will be thought of and used. And usually when we think about integration that way, it's because we're thinking about it as a tactic, something I have to do. Now, I like to think about integration about enabling innovation, acceleration. And that is what comes when you think about integration from a strategic perspective. Now, tying into what Tom talked earlier about, what do we bring these together, the concept of integration, the concept of strategy, and why does it matter? So today's enterprise is extremely diverse. Tom talked about thousands of applications. Those applications were built at different times by different people. They may be operated by different people. They use different technology stacks. And all of these are the responsibility of the organization, and they oftentimes have the core business. But at the same time, the need to innovate and the need to accelerate is growing further and further. And so how do we take care of these assets, make sure that they do what they need to do, but are selective in where we invest and how we move these things forward? Having a strategic approach to integration gives the organization that opportunity. It allows minimization of risk. It allows incremental change. And over time, it can act over the course of many years in order to drive outcomes for the business. Okay, so what are the possible strategies? First, And we can have no strategy. One, a common strategy, HTTP everything. Enterprise Service Bus is another strategy. And then there's a cloud integration strategy. So I'm going to go into these all in a bit more detail. So it may seem a bit silly, but one strategy is to have no strategy. But sometimes that might make sense. Someone in the crowd put up their hand and said that they were a startup. That might be the case for a startup. It may be that at that point in time, having a strategy around this is actually not critical. So what are the benefits of doing that? One, it avoids complicating other strategic initiatives that you have. It enables experimentation. You may be able to try different things that otherwise you might be restricted to because you were trying to align your decisions. And it can provide time to clarify the needs. So there can be some of the reasons to say, we're going to defer defining a strategy here. But some of the cons of this are you can have decision fatigue. Constantly people in your organization are trying to decide, should we do this? Should we do that? Then they have those fun meetings that Tom was talking about. And that can really slow things down. You also miss opportunities to accelerate. And you can create one-way doors, as Tom was talking about. You can create problems that end up being the legacy of the future. And so this is why it might be the right approach for you, but probably not. The next one, very common one actually, is HTTP everything. So with HTTP everything, web APIs they're simple to get started with, they're ubiquitous all over the place, and they have this benefit of being agnostic to technology stack. And so HTTP has been the basis of much of our computing innovation. And so this allows things to integrate really well together. So we will see organizations that will say our strategy is to be HTTP for everything. And there certainly are cases where that will work and work very well. However, there are some cons to being HTTP everything. So it can push complexity into the components that are interacting with each other. And this tends to scale exponentially as the number of units needing to integrate with each other are. Sometimes customers say they end up with a spaghetti of systems interacting with each other. It can be a challenge for things that are asynchronous that have to run long, and it can be a challenge for data. So this may be a good strategy for you, but typically it's not good enough on its own. You probably need more. A common pattern that we'll also see is Enterprise Service Bus, where you will bring in a comprehensive piece of software that brings with it all of those integration capabilities. And this can be a very good solution for some customers and very successful with it. The solutions come off the shelf. It's comprehensive in what it covers. And especially if you have an organization that's well centralized, has a team to manage it, has the right skill sets, this can work really, really well. But it can have some downsides as well. One, they tend to have very high upfront costs. You have to invest in this. It's software you need to purchase, and you can have to purchase it for a long time. It can grow in cost depending on the number of users using it, et cetera. And so this can slow things down, and it can make it challenging to do that experimentation that Tom was talking about. And it can also create single points of failure, not just technology-wise, but also in the organization. And so while we find that this can be very successful, we find a lot of the customers that I talk about are finding that it doesn't scale to their needs as the only part of their solution. So what's the alternative? And that is a cloud integration strategy on AWS. So what we have found is that organizations that look at the cloud as their integration strategy tend to be far more successful. And part of the reason is, if you step back and look at how we do things at Amazon, Tom alluded to this earlier, we are unusually customer obsessed. So we don't build things unless our customers have told us that they really need it and there's a concrete need. And we don't believe there's one size fits all. And this is why when you come to AWS, you see a suite, a breadth, and a depth of services and capabilities in order to meet those needs. And we find that this aligns very well with the challenge of integration. And so while we have this broad set of needs, one way we like to think about this is by breaking it down into application integration, data integration, and file integration. Now, obviously none of these work in isolation. They have overlap and they have relations, but this lens can help you kind of think through the aspects of how you would move forward with a cloud-based integration strategy. So application integration is really a lot about APIs, API management. And more we're finding today is a lot about event-driven architectures. One of the most successful and effective ways to handle these challenges in integrating is to employ an event-driven architecture. How many here are familiar with event-driven architectures? Okay.
Impressive.
Very good, very good. How many of you use them within your enterprise now? Okay.
Even more impressive.
That's really great to see. So event-driven architectures are a pattern that's not new. It's been around for a very long time. But the challenges in the landscape, as well as the technology available in the cloud, have really brought these together. We're seeing a lot of customers using event-driven architecture as a core part of their cloud-based integration strategy. When it comes to data integration, we have data all over. Data is so vital to the enterprise. It's the oil of the current day, and the enterprise needs to make sure that that data is integrated and available in the right places, aligning with compliance and security requirements. And so a lot of thought around data. And then a special kind of data is file-based data and integrating files. And so there are a lot of times where you need to think about that a little bit more specifically than general data. Oftentimes people will use file-based systems in order to integrate together applications, very common. And you also may have special needs such as EDI if you're looking at procurement, et cetera. And so there's a lot of file-based integration that's out there. So that gives you kind of hopefully a high-level overview of the sort of aspects of a cloud-based integration strategy. And now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Brian to talk about some specific customer scenarios.
Just before you do, we look at what are the mega trends, and one of 4 technology mega trends is the incredible growth of data, the variety and the use of it. So you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And that's a strategy that's urgent because it's coming fast.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, thank you, Justin. So I get the good fortune of getting to go through a few of some case studies from actual AWS customers. I know we have a lot of developers. There's going to be a little bit more technical detail in here. If you want even more detail, both of these have blog posts that are written up. So you can go out and punch these into your favorite search engine and find them pretty easily. So the first one is a company called KnowBe4. I was able to help out with this one when the KnowBe4 was going through one of our accelerator programs, which was really neat. But what KnowBe4 does is they are a cybersecurity firm. And what they offer to their customers, who would be folks like us, is training. And so it is a security awareness training, and they've got these really neat user interfaces. And in some ways, it's a way to train you what to look out for phishing attacks and other types of cybersecurity issues. So it's a user behavior system to train you about, again, how to identify things like that. And like I mentioned, they're known for some pretty interesting user interfaces and behavior-changing approaches to this type of training. All right, so we have a lot of developers. Who here right now is running a batch process somewhere? All right, don't feel bad. That's okay. I've done this, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. This is a perfectly valid strategy. Like Justin was saying, many things have trade-offs, and this has one. So this was KnowBe4's sort of status quo, if you will. So this was what they were doing to crunch some data that they had in a backend database, create some materialized views, get that data in the right shape that was available for their end user application. So this works. I mean, this can work for a long time. However, if you're successful, you're going to get more customers. And if you're successful, that more customers usually means more data. So over time, the database gets bigger, and now your batch processing takes longer. It's a very, very simple calculation. I've also, I come from the startup world many years ago and hit this, where we have a batch process and all of a sudden you're looking at the clock saying, ooh, I don't know if we're gonna finish before tomorrow. This happens, and so this was the situation that KnowBe4 hit. This was one of the challenges that they faced, was that the database was growing. This was taking longer and longer to run overnight. The other challenge is, of course, there are bugs in software. Things happen. There is different data that shows up that you might not have expected. Someone pushes a bug out to your batch system. And when that happens in the middle of the night, unless you catch that quickly, now all of a sudden the data is stale. So the application-facing database that customers are reading from through their application all of a sudden has stale data. So what do the customers do? Of course, they're going to call up customer support, say, I don't see what I'm expecting. Customer support was having to go back, reach into the originating database, comb through everything, and then get the answer to their customers. So that, of course, is not a great use of time. That adds up. It's time wasted, which is money wasted. The other thing with this is that they didn't have just one backend database, there were multiple, and their developers were also facing problems. So they needed more data quicker to go out and build new features. They didn't know what was out there, what data was out there, what was the shape of it. Again, I've experienced this. When you go out and you're looking at the data that you have internally to work with, you need to have to actually go in and understand that. It's not, very often it's not in very neatly organized tables. It is something that you have to go out and talk to people, figure out and digest yourself before you can actually make use of it as a developer. So that was the status quo. That was where they were coming from. And one of their big decisions was, KnowBe4 said, we want to embrace real-time processing or near real-time processing. We are going to embrace event-driven architecture. So what they did is create a central event bridge, event bus, and segment that into one account. They had different AWS accounts where each team was building their own microservice. Who here is familiar with event bridge, event buses? So a few of you.
Brian,
yeah.
can I just jump in here and just tie it into some of the things we talked about earlier. So you can see this customer at the beginning had a tactical approach of integrating these two systems together. And then they recognized that they had the more general needs. And so what Brian's talking about here, they're looking at one system that was batch, but they were also looking at how do I take a more strategic approach. So as Brian explains this more, I want you to see how that ties through to this event-driven, not just being a tactical thing that they were thinking about, but really driven by a strategy that they wanted to push more broadly.
And I'm going to share a NASA use case where it was almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Panic.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. So individual teams working in their own accounts with their individual service. And now what happens is that when a team has something that they want to distribute out to other teams, rather than dumping it into a database and waiting for the batch process to pick it up overnight, they can publish that through EventBridge. And EventBridge, if you're not familiar with it, is a push-based message broker. So EventBridge will now go and push that message out to whoever has subscribed to it, a particular type of message. This is really fast. EventBridge is very, very good at this. And again, things like Kafka or Kinesis that you might be familiar with, those are pull-based systems. EventBridge is a push-based system. And so these teams, in this case, the yellow team and the pink team, they just have the messages, the events showing up on their doorstep without doing work. Just saying like, hey, we're interested in this type of event. This is my subscription. That event is now delivered. And this happens, like I said, very, very quickly, like typically sub-second latency. And then likewise, the yellow team can now publish an event that the pink team is interested in, and this pattern continues on and on and on. All right, so behind the scenes, each team standardized on a particular pattern. And you don't have to do this, but this is what KnowBe4 did. And that pattern was, as soon as a message would show up with EventBridge, they would queue that up in an Amazon SQS queue, which was connected to an AWS Lambda function. So Lambda function was pulling from the queue. And they did this to buffer messages so that they weren't overwhelming any downstream systems. And then they chose Amazon Aurora Serverless v2 database so that each team was managing their own databases. So the thing that I want you to take away here is that it is not just a technology choice. It's not just a technology solution. They actually align their teams around particular business domains. Right? Yeah. So here, each team is owning their own infrastructure, but it's organized around a particular business domain. And if you're not familiar with that term, it comes from the world of domain-driven design. But think about something like e-commerce. You would have maybe a shopping cart, purchasing, customer support. Those are business problems that you solve. So these teams were distributed in that way. So it was a reorganization of the engineering teams to align with their integration strategy.
So Brian, what Brian's saying is super, super important. And so it shows also why a strategic view means there are multiple types of decisions. They're not just technical decisions or sets of technical decisions. They're organizational decisions that come along with this. And as Brian said, when we look at customers adopting event-driven architectures, that is not just a technology thing. That's very much a people thing. And in the end, I don't know about you, but most of the times I found my technology problems tend to come down to people problems. And so it's really, really important to show how this aligns across and how this is about enabling the organization, changing the organization, and having a strategic impact there as well.
I just want to add, it's people, but it's also business impact. So if it's just technology, the executives won't care. But if you solve a business problem and show the demo, then they will ask, okay, how did you do that? So that's, if you ever give a demo, here's a strong recommendation. Don't start with a description of the demo, start with a demo, and then tell them what it is.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't see enough of.
Thanks, Tom. Brian?
All right. All right, so you in the audience, astute readers or viewers might notice that now all of a sudden we've taken one database that the front-end application was talking to, and we've split it into 3 databases. So how do we work around that now, or how did KnowBe4 work around that? Again, end users are now connecting and need data from 3 disparate databases that are, again, running independently, managed by different teams. So what do? The title is a little bit of a spoiler alert. What they chose was to use GraphQL and AWS AppSync, which is our fully managed serverless GraphQL service, to integrate different data, these different databases, to provide a unified access layer to their end customers. And if you don't know GraphQL, that's okay, don't worry. GraphQL has this really neat ability to go out and for one payload of data, you can create resolvers to go out and fetch independent parts of one payload from different data stores. So for this, they use Aurora Serverless v2. They could have also used something like a Lambda function or reaching out to a DynamoDB table. But this was their strategy to solve for this. Okay, the results. So like we mentioned at the beginning, like I mentioned at the beginning, batch is often something that's 24 hours, right? Maybe you have to run that on a schedule because you need the data more frequently. So it's, maybe you're looking at hours. The other thing with batches that I didn't mention earlier is, very often it's an easy solution, but very often, I remember doing this myself, is that you're reprocessing maybe 95% of the data that doesn't change, right? But you're just doing it batch because you need to pick up all those changes, and it's just hard to figure out what exactly needs to run. So they went from a batch system, which was many hours, to seconds, literally seconds. The data is now produced and delivered into its final resting place, available for customers within seconds. So this is really, really powerful. And this is, again, it's the decision, the strategic decision to say we are going to embrace event-driven architecture and real-time processing. Some other really neat results, they came up with, during this project, they came up with 235 unique business events that they were publishing. And this project took 4 months from inception to completion. I find that to be quite impressive. That's pretty fast for an enterprise to do this in 4 months. In that time, they processed nearly 4 billion messages. So that's 3.6, that's about 900,000 messages every single month. Again, that is really impressive. Quick note on that I just realized, even with pricing, EventBridge charges per million events. It's $1 per million events, so that's about $3.60. So again, very, very powerful.
By the way, when you talk to executives, they'll remember that.
Yes, yeah. So if you're trying to convince people, your leaders, business leaders, make note of this. I mean, our fully managed services, our serverless portfolio is often very, very attractive from a pricing perspective. I would say this last bullet point might be one that they really gets their attention. So on an ongoing manner, they've continued to build on top of this platform. New projects or new workloads that they're creating are shipping a full quarter ahead of schedule, and they've had a 99.949 of availability and uptime. They're more fault tolerant. EventBridge will do things like automatically retry for you if there's a failure downstream. So overall, this was a really big success.
Yeah, and that's really, we tie it back to what Tom said at the beginning about the need for speed. We all know, I think all of us face this. We want to move faster ourselves. We face these impediments. And when an organization can achieve this level of increase in speed, it's incredibly important to the business, and it enables new outcomes for the business as well. And so I think if you bring this back, probably as the executive, this is going to be the thing that they're going to be most excited about.
Yep. And like I said, there are 2 blog posts, part 1 and part 2 out there. You can go ahead, I encourage you to read those, and there's even more detail behind the scenes. All right, from KnowBe4, let's move on to Regeneron. So Regeneron is a biotechnology company. They were founded in 1988, so that was a while ago. And they develop medicines for diseases, eye diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease and other rare conditions. And they were faced with a challenge where they were transferring files over FTP. Again, they started in 1988. So, FTP, SFTP, these are tried and true means to get data from one place to another. Are people, who out there is using this today as part of your, yeah, so there's a few hands. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. These are technologies that customers still use today, and that's fine. However, for Regeneron, this was becoming more and more of a burden because scalability. As they had more demand or more users or bigger files, they had to deal with the scalability of their system. Security risks, so they were on the hook because it was their system that they were managing. They're on the hook for patching things and making sure that this system is secure. Of course, they have compliance needs. They are interacting with internal and external customers. And you can imagine biotech companies probably dealing with PII and other things that are very sensitive. And the big thing, and I've seen other customers have this need also, is they didn't want to go and just throw away SFTP. I mean, sometimes you say like, oh, just get rid of that. Like, let's do this via some fancy, like we can create some APIs or just write to S3. But that requires customers, our customers, to now go and ask for behavior change from all of their customers. That's not always possible, or even that's not good business. And so they really wanted to keep the same SFTP integration pattern.
I just want to say quickly and tie this back to something I talked about earlier about embracing diversity, where if we look at the challenges facing, sometimes we want to take something and change it to something new, and sometimes we want to allow it and continue to leverage something that's in place. Giving you as an organization that flexibility to make the right choice, it isn't paint by numbers. It isn't, in this case, always going to be the right place to reuse or almost to replace. A lot of being able to embrace that diversity gives you flexibility, allows you to move more quickly.
Okay, so we've set the foundation here for the challenges that they were facing. So what did they do? Again, they've got internal users and external users who are using a variety of SFTP clients. I'm sure some of the names here are familiar to you. They were for me when I saw this one. So what was the solution? They went and leveraged our AWS transfer family, which is a drop-in replacement for supporting protocols like FTP, SFTP, AS2. And again, this is a managed service that scales on demand. So they no longer have to deal with the scaling of this. We'll handle that for you. And likewise, the security, things like that. They're using a fully managed service. Our service teams are going to take care of a lot of those challenges that they had to worry about earlier.
Is anybody using AWS Transfer Family? A couple, about 4. Okay.
Yeah, very useful set of services.
And one of the reasons why I love this service is that I tell my customers, if you have data needs and you can get to S3, life is really good. Get to S3 because that enables so many other things, so many other events that you can trigger or react to. And what they did here is that, so Transfer Family, if you're not familiar, is backed by S3. So the interface is, like I said, SFTP, but that data is actually stored in S3. And here what they were able to do is leverage different tiers of storage for S3. So data that was infrequently accessed, they could offload via a lifecycle policy to Glacier. So this is going to save them money, and it's transparent to the end user. Likewise, they were able to use our AWS Key Management Service, or KMS, for encrypting the data that was at rest. And this was a key that they managed, and that met their security requirements. And there's a lot of other detail on this blog post. Some of them I just didn't have time to go through. Another thing I really liked is that they were able to build their own custom authentication and authorization service, again, with our serverless portfolio, API Gateway, Lambda, and some other services as well. So this one is really neat.
I just want to highlight again your power as AWS customers. Glacier and intelligent tiering came from JPL as developers trying to figure out how do we do this. So if you dive into this and you have ideas, you have the people who can impact the service right here. So make your voice be heard.
All right, so results, like no before, this was just coincidence. They also completed this within 4 months. So in 4 months, end to end, got this one done. Because of S3 and transfer family, they were able to optimize storage costs 80%, and they dropped their overall cost by 90%. So just to hit that one, drive that one home, the final cost was 10% of the original solution. Again, going back to leadership or trying to get people's attention, that matters. I think that will a 90% cost savings is a really powerful outcome of this. Of course, there is the cost of the services, but there's also total cost of ownership. And so with this one, they were able to reduce the total labor costs because they didn't have to manage so much of their own infrastructure. Again, leveraging our managed services.
And building on what Brian's saying, he talked earlier about S3 and Tom's talking about the importance of data. Now this cloud strategy, by bringing this data, making it available in an S3, now there's just an enormous amount of possibilities that can be taken to integrate that data and to build more valuable capabilities for the enterprise.
Yep. And of course, scales on demand, I mentioned that earlier. The next one that we're going to go through is about JPL. I'm not that qualified to speak about this one, so I'm going to hand it to someone who is. The one thing I wanted to drive home here, it sort of echoes what Tom and Justin were talking about, is that the thing that I have noticed in my time working with integration and customers is that the customers who are really successful are the ones that they have a strategy up front and they really, really commit to that. So I do talk with customers who, they're pulling some services off the shelf and put it in a jar and kind of shake it up and dipping their toes in the water a little bit. The ones who are really successful like these two, like Regeneron and KnowBe4, I think what I've seen is that they're really committed to doing this, and it is a priority. It's a strategic decision for their business. So I would just encourage you to think about that. It's not just technology. It's commitment, starting small, moving fast, and getting that executive sponsorship. So Tom?
Thank you. Strategy, I'm going to talk about panic. Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Is anybody here from a public sector company? Okay. So you're going to really resonate with this. We know about JPL. So the issue here was, how do you execute a mission when the requirements are completely unknown? You have no idea. So the issue here was, public sector is not allowed to advertise, but we can do outreach. And we were really, really passionate about Mars. So we wanted the world to be passionate about Mars. So what the issue was, could we create an application, or essentially a website, where you could send your name to Mars, and it would roll on the surface of Mars. And you'd be interested in Mars, so when we launched our spacecraft, you'd be into it. Did anybody send your name to Mars? Anybody go to this website?
Someone?
You and I.
Let's fly up and check.
Great. So the problem here was, how many people would log on? And we thought maybe 2 million names in 90 days was kind of what we guessed. We had no idea. So I'd heard about this new thing called serverless computing. For the executives, if you want to explain it, phase one of the cloud was we take our data center, we put it into a big data center in the sky, and we no longer have to manage the hardware. We still have to manage the servers. You still have to know how many to spin up. So serverless promised that we would get rid of that. So I went to a most senior developer and I said, Philip, this serverless thing, figure it out and see if we can use this AWS new service, Lambda and all of those. You have 2 weeks. And he went off and he figured it out. So that's the power of actually diving deep and figuring it out. So we ended up using serverless. And those 2 million names that we would get over 90 days, we broke 2 million names in 2 hours. There's nothing we could have predicted that would not have crashed. So in the end, we were very successful. We were teaming with the outreach department that said, okay, we'll try it. And now everything that you see from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, like Name the Rover contest, et cetera, it's all serverless because it reduces the risk tremendously. And there's some technical things that you will know about. There was another one, an untold story. What we found is that people are very creative with their names. Hopefully you and I were not. A lot of dirty words. So what do? You have senior engineers sitting there filtering out dirty words. Wasn't there another way? Well, there was reinforcement learning. So what we did is there's some things that are obvious, some things that are not, and then human in the middle. And we just trained the algorithm, and these people now got time back to do engineering and programming. Worked really well. So that became a pattern going forward. So I think if you think about this strategically now, but start fast and try it out. So that's what we found, and it was a great success, and happy to talk much more about it at some point, and just recommend that you dive into this fast.
So thanks, Tom. And you can see how all of this was enabled by the cloud strategy and being able to integrate these pieces together in order to meet an emerging need here. Now, Tom talked about the need for speed. Apparently, we got the message, so we've gotten through a lot of our content really quickly. We don't have slides on this, but I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about another customer scenario where integration strategy was really, really critical, and where you can learn more by going off to our website. So there's a customer of ours called Nationwide Children's Hospital. So Nationwide Children's Hospital is one of the largest pediatric hospitals in the United States, and they have partnered with a genomics research institute as well. So they bring genomics research together with clinical application. And what that means is they study the genomes, the specific genetic makeup of their patients, and use that to drive medical outcomes and medical improvements. What it means is when there's a sick kid that comes in, typically with cancer, they can use their technology and their research to understand the genomic basic of that disease and provide targeted treatment. So some of the most incredible you can imagine, these children and these families facing this difficult scenario, that speed really, really matters. So when they were looking to grow and scale this was a process that would take on the order of weeks to get done. During those weeks, that child was not getting therapy. That family was left uncertain as to what to do. And they looked at this and said, we're going to do this in the cloud, and we are going to take an integration first perspective. So what they did there was they recognized they had a lot of physical processes that needed to run. They needed to then get data, analyze that data, process it through many different AWS services. And so they started with an event-driven architecture to begin with. What that allowed them to do was to take these pieces that were done in different parts, even across different services, large amounts of data, and compose them together to quickly get things going. Then, as this evolved, they were able to recognize new needs, and when an additional capability was required, they didn't have to rewrite all of the stuff that they were doing. They would simply say, maybe we have one sub-process that's running, and it's triggered, and maybe using AWS step functions in order to process this data. Then what they would say is we're just going to create a new workflow that will also be triggered and integrated with the start of one of the previous ones. And why that's so important is making these changes would require risk for existing processes, but it could even have compliance and regulatory impact because of who you would need to go through and validate these things. And so by thinking about integration to begin with, thinking about being event-driven, they gave themselves the flexibility to continue to change in an environment that typically doesn't move that quickly. And the outcome of this is that at the end of the project, this process that would normally take weeks would take on the order of a day. And so within a day, a sick child could present, and that doctor could be armed with this critical information, able to give the best care. And so another example that really talks about speed, both for moving the engineering forward, also delivering faster results in a place that really, really deeply matters.
And if I want to back up on the strategy side, a strategy without data is kind of worthless. So we had at NASA, we had this new serverless idea. And everybody's worried about it because it's unknown how much it will cost when you have a fixed budget. So I was in the Mission to Europa meeting where we're actually going to Europa looking for life in the big ice lakes. And that's a moon of Jupiter. And they said, we can't use this serverless thing. So I said, okay, how much do you think it'll cost? Well, we had done a thing with Alexa where we use serverless, and 1 million names stored, processed, 4 cents. So I said that in this big review, and they go, oh, okay, well, okay, all right, we'll go serverless. So bring the data to the strategy, look at the builds, look at all the details, and you can actually change the strategy right away.
Thanks, Tom. So what I'm going to do is put this QR code up. You can click on this and it'll go, you can find a whole bunch of resources. You can find the case studies that we've been talking about today. You can find links to a whole bunch of other materials. I would also encourage all of you, once this presentation will be put up on YouTube, as will many of the others that are being delivered this week here at reInvent, give you chances to dig into other customer stories, dig into the services that we're talking about, dig into patterns such as event-driven architecture that you can then use to bring together with this type of approach and help your organization to move more quickly. So with that, I'll say thank you, and if we have some people who wanted to ask a few questions, we can take those now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.